Morning. As you're now well aware, Ben's my name. I'm going to be talking to you about conditioning for female personnel. Now, the majority of research is done in the military, so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about and displaying will be military-based research. However, a lot of these lessons can be applied to police, fire, corrections, take your pick as well. So a bit of an overview from me. Before we get stuck into what the research says about conditioning for female personnel, just want to touch on the relationship between conditioning and injuries that Rob already alluded to as well. Talk about the differences in physiological load that female personnel have when conducting occupational tasks. Look at some of the recommendations from the research, but also the limitations on the research that's been done to date. And then I really want to share some of the recent research that's coming out from New Zealand that hasn't been published yet, which I think is fantastic, and we could all take a leaf out of their book. Okay, so hopefully no one in this room needs any convincing that females have a very important role in defence and across emergency services more broadly. Globally, roles are opening up for females in defence. In 2016, combat roles became available to female members in the Defence Force. About 30% representation in most modern militaries. There's the ADF figures there, pushing up to the 2019 figures there too, with some pretty ambitious targets of around 30% in each service by 2030 as well. Having females in these organisations also gives you a bigger population pool to draw upon as well. Two main issues though. To date, most research shows that females are injured more and that meet the standards less for physically demanding job roles in particular. There's a couple of issues with that though. As part of some of the work we did with the Defence Health Foundation back in 2022, we did a systematic review looking at injury rates. And apart from these four locations, correct, the research does show that in most cases, females are injured more than male soldiers. These four locations in particular are pretty much exposure-based. So exposure to combat training. So your traumatic shoulder dislocations, meniscal tears, spinal injuries, and scaphoid fractures. However, there is some research globally that does show that injury rates between male and female personnel are pretty much exactly the same, and we'll touch on some of that soon. Local data, Australian-based data, similar sort of story. The injury rates in females are about 1.5 times that of males, all except for the shoulder, which is not different between males and females, predominantly due to the involvement in sport in the Australian military as well. So a lot of shoulder dislocations happen in rugby and soccer as well. What's really interesting though, when you talk about crusty drill sergeants that Rob just alluded to, in basic training, injury rates are about 2 times higher in females than in males. In officer training, they're about 1.7 times higher. And yet at other stages of the career, they come down to about 1.2 times the rate of males, which is almost bordering on not being a significant difference at all. So what's interesting as well, that within studies, this rate changes. So pre-deployment injuries are higher in females than males, but by the time they get on deployment, injury rates tend to equalise. On deployment, males tend to lose fitness, females tend to increase fitness. Males tend to smoke more, females tend to smoke less. Within basic training, within the same studies, females are injured more. However, when they progress into advanced individual training, or the IETs that we have over here, the occupational specific training, they tend to equalise as well. The same thing's seen in officer training. Early in officer training, females are injured more. Later in officer training, females are injured less. So exposure to military conditioning tends to make females more robust, more resilient, and less injured. So why? What are some of the reasons for this potential difference? So we did another review. This was based on trying to categorise these risk factors into 3 distinct areas, broken down into demographics or anthropometrics, personal factors, and then fitness. So if we start going through these one by one, when it comes to age, it's not clear. Some studies will show that younger age is a risk factor for injuries. Some will show older age is less of a risk factor for injuries. I'll say this delicately, given the number of pips on shoulders that I see around the room, but age is often a proxy measure for length of service. So as we are in the service longer, we get promoted more. As you get promoted more, you tend to do physical activity or get exposed to these activities less. So therefore your injury risk goes down. So younger people are exposed to higher risky activities for injury, and older people are somewhat less exposed. However, the older person doing the same concurrent training as a younger person is at a greater injury risk. Height is absolutely not a risk factor from any of the studies that we reviewed. Body mass, body fat, BMI, absolutely not a risk factor for injuries in female soldiers. Interestingly enough, it is in males. So there's a bimodal curve in males where BMI, those at the lower level of BMI, those at the higher level of BMI are both at a risk factor for injuries. The caveat to that one is that females with a low BMI and low push-up scores are at a greater risk of overuse injuries in particular. When it comes to personal factors, smoking history is a big risk factor for injury. Having a previous injury is a risk factor for injuries. Physical activity levels are a bit of an interesting one. Females who do unit-based PT are at a higher risk of injury, similar to the ability-based training that Rob alluded to. Females who do their own physical activity are a lower risk of injury. This is while they are deployed. However, pre-enlistment physical activities is unclear at this point in time. People who are fitter tend to underestimate the current level of activity they're doing. People who are unfit tend to overestimate the current levels of activity that they're doing. So that reliance on self-report really doesn't paint a clear picture when it comes to injury risk. Interestingly enough, those who have been deployed are injured less. Typically, there's a standard that you have to meet in order to be deployed, so that might explain some of that difference. Moving to fitness, the APFT, the Army Physical Fitness Test that Rob alluded to, paints this really interesting picture where the higher that they score, the less likely they are to be injured. As they go down and down, you can see that injury rate just increasing more and more and more, with 270 points on the ACFT tending to be the cutoff point for injuries. Push-ups, absolutely. Low push-up score is a risk factor for injuries in female soldiers. Sit-ups, interestingly, is not in basic training at all. It can be later on into a career, but it's really unclear whether or not sit-ups are an accurate predictor of injuries in females. Much to my dismay and goes against all my biases, but power, speed and flexibility are absolutely not a risk factor for injury in any of the studies that we looked at. The FMS, same thing. No movement skills measured by the FMS are a risk factor for injury. The Y balance scale, interestingly, was an aerobic fitness, no matter how you measure it, whether it's a 1.2 or 2.4, a 2-mile run, a 3-mile run, the progressive shuttle run test absolutely is one of the biggest risk factors for injury in female soldiers. One of the other big ones as well is heavy occupational tasks. So Tanya Roy did a couple of studies on female soldiers deployed to Afghanistan. Those were the cutoffs there. Performing heavy occupational tasks for females are most definitely a massive risk factor for injuries while on deployment. So that really highlights the importance of the upper limb strength that Rob spoke about for all the uni sports members in the team, the importance of upper limb strength for females. When you adjust for fitness, there's no difference between injury rates between males and females. So it's not sex per se. It's not males, females, it's fitness. Really highlighting the importance of the role of conditioning aerobic fitness in female personnel. And it doesn't matter where it is. One's in active duty, one's in basic training. At any stage of the career, you get an equivalent male and female with the same fitness level, the injury risk is exactly the same. This paints a picture. The green line there is the cohorts that were not injured at any stage within those papers on military personnel. The red line is the cohorts that were injured. This little spike here is a study in the Israeli Defence Force, their physical training instructors, a bit of an outlier. But if we draw a couple of averages on there, the non-injured group, their average is 42 mils per kilo per minute, so about 8.8 on the shuttle run. So a bit higher than the entry standards of defence. The injured group, 32.2, around 6 on the shuttle run. So there's 7.5 on the shuttle run. There's 6.5 on the shuttle run. Definitely not a good idea to drop the standards for entrance, that's for sure. You see the same thing with push-up performance. We've got our orange line indicating the uninjured group and the blue lining indicated the injured group. 17.5 is the average for the injured group there and 37 the uninjured group. Those red lines that you see there are the current standards for combat and non-combat roles for females in the Defence Force. Females make greater improvements in fitness than males in all attributes in military training. All of them. Really begs the question, do females enlist at a lower level of their fitness relative to their actual potential? The differences in physiological load imparted by some of these tasks as well. Thank you, Rob, for stealing my thunder on this one. Some of the work we did with the US Marines, some good numbers here, 929 US Marines, all wearing heart rate straps. So Karen Kelly's got her US Marine Corps doing staged progressive pack marches over there. So they have the first 6 marches there that you see just increases in duration, but a gradual increase in load as well, until the subsequent 6 tend to run by distance, not time. So these are all equatable because they all stop at the same time. As soon as females got to 15 kilos of load, or about a quarter of their body weight, they have a significantly greater physiological cost as measured by average and peak heart rate. We did something similar with the New Zealand Army recently as well. So instead of just the polar heart rate straps, we instrumented with the VO2 masters as well, looking at their respiratory exchange. Now, interestingly, these groups, we had a bunch of male soldiers, all the standard anthropometrics there, carrying about 34% of their body weight. So the standard combat load for these guys were 22 kilograms, I believe. A fit cohort, 56.7 mils per kilo per minute. It's about level 13 on the shuttle run. So this is a variety of soldiers from a bunch of different corps. The female cohort, as you'd expect, significantly shorter, significantly lighter, carrying significantly greater relative load, but still a pretty fit cohort of female soldiers. We're talking about level 9 on the shuttle run there as well, which is pretty good. So similar to what we found in the Marine Corps, females had a significantly greater cardiovascular demand as measured by average and peak heart rate. This was 3 repeat 5-kilometer pack marches with 22 kilos of load, but also had a significantly greater physiological cost as measured by the VO2 masters. So the males in this were operating at about 74% of their maximum. The females, as you see over there, were operating about 105% of their aerobic capacity with 22 kilos of load on their back. So what does the research show? So what is required? What does a female soldier or a female police officer, female firefighter, female corrections officer, what do they need to be able to do the job? Unfortunately, they need everything. A bit of everything. So aerobic fitness we've alluded to numerous times as far as injury risk goes, but also its relationship with being able to carry heavy loads as well. They need anaerobic fitness. They need muscular strength, both relative, absolute, and grip strength that Rob spoke to about. Very important for marksmanship, but also defensive tactics. Those who have lower grip strength, especially in police, are more likely to escalate their use of force. Muscular power is important for fire and movement skills, CASEVACs, and also its relation to injury risk as well. Flexibility, range of motion, it's asterisked. It's dubious whether or not it has a relationship to injury risk. Unclear, but it makes sense that if someone doesn't have the required flexibility to get into some of those firing positions, they will have problems. Agility, change of direction, same thing. Its relationship to fire and movement skills and being able to navigate obstacles and or stairs. And then muscular endurance, important for pack march, occupational tasks, but it's also part of BFA performance. The PFA performance prior to enlistment, but BFA when they're in there as well, because a lot of those assessments are endurance-based. So what does the research show? The research shows that a minimum of 6 months of periodized combined resistance and endurance training is recommended prior to combat roles. All the e-sports guys, that would be ideal, wouldn't it? But quite often we're getting people come in, they do their PFA, they're hitting 5.5s on the shuttle run, and they've got an enlistment date. 6 months would be a luxury. Obviously, that 6 months should include load carriage, upper body strength and power, heavy resistance training. I'd even say lower than that. HIIT training and flexible nonlinear programs to be able to replicate the demands of the unpredictable military environments as well. Muscle mass and strength gains are achievable in females. Task-specific training is important. Obviously, progressive overload and periodization, all the standard things. Neuromuscular control is essential for females, particularly the lower limb and their risk of injury around ACLs. The upper limb should be the focus. The deficit between male and female in the lower limb tends to be about tends to be all the way around. The strength in the lower limb for females is about 66% of that of males. It's 52% in the upper limb of that of males. Strength is basically proportionate to the cross-sectional areas of muscle fibers. So if you put on a more cross-sectional area of muscle fibers, you will get those strength gains. Some of the work Robbo's done has highlighted the importance of aerobic fitness and strength for load carriage in particular. Despite all this research, despite what is known, many females, I won't generalize, but many females are still reluctant to do heavy resistance training. Excuse the pun, but what is the resistance to getting strong? Let's come back to the fact that the conditioning world is pretty new. You know, the position stand from the NSCA on female conditioning is only 30 years old. This has only been around relatively recently. Conditioning for females typically involved aerobic training, stretching, and light resistance. Some people face a societal concern. I'm sure many of you have heard females say, I don't want to get huge, and therefore they train at a lower than prescribed threshold. They conduct more endurance training to offset some of those hypertrophy gains as well. They can be stigmatized for being too manly. And those who do succeed in the athletic world have their femininity questioned and sometimes even investigated. This is some older stats here from 2012, but collegiate athletes in the NCAA in the US, 50% of the male athletes were required to do resistance training, while only 9% of females were competing at that tier 1 level. If we look at the research that was alluded to previously, and 4 more that I'm going to introduce now as well, there's very few that are actually conducted in military environments. A lot of military conditioning research is conducted in civilians, which doesn't quite replicate some of those demands that Rob alluded to before as well. Few actually conduct them on military personnel. They use university students, which again, completely different cohort. Some of them, ironically, don't even aim to change fitness. We'll talk about those soon. And some of them don't compare the groups statistically. Begs the question as well, what is military training? Is it log PT? Is it doing push-ups in cams? Is it doing arm farm in cams? Is it doing combat PT? Is it just doing weight-loaded vest push-ups? Or is it everyone's favorite, battle ropes, to have the most successful handshake you've ever seen? So we conducted a bit of a review at the back end of this Defence Health study. These are the 4 studies, the only 4 studies, which looked at conditioning females in a military setting. The 2 studies by Joe Napick at the start, they implemented an intervention group and a control group. So they were doing, the control group was doing your standard military PT, your long, slow distance, your thousands of push-ups, thousands of sit-ups. This was their additional intervention. So hopefully some coaches are looking at those weights for your dumbbells and thinking that might be chronically underloaded. And we'll talk about that soon. The study by Williams here, I would argue that is the only sort of dosage that would achieve anything meaningful in this population. The study by Wood down the bottom there was basically just following them along, basic training with their standard body weight exercises, higher rep, to see what would happen. So the study by Napick, the I there is the intervention group, the C is the control. The control group actually had more push-ups than the intervention group. Specificity, do more push-ups, get better at push-ups. The intervention group actually had more sit-ups. Similar to what Rob was talking about, sit-ups is a proxy measure for global fitness. So that might explain that. You'll notice, though, that the intervention group actually decreased their run time by a lot more than the control group, doing that HIIT training, those sprints as well. What's interesting with Joe Napick's 2 studies here, that wasn't the intent of this study. that addition of that light dumbbell work, that change of direction speed and those sprints actually decrease injury risk by 28.6% in these females. Similar study the second time. You'll note on that first one, that push-up performance is pretty low and it improved quite significantly. This is in basic training. Later on in the career, push-ups are a lot better. Similar sort of setup though, not a lot of difference between the two, but 56.5% less likely to suffer an injury from the addition of those global movements under resistance. The study by Williams that I spoke about, which arguably was the only one with an adequate dose to be able to elicit any strength gains. Across the board, almost 5% decrease in body fat, almost 4 kilos fat-free mass, increase in box lift, ironically decrease in upright pull, increase in dynamic lift, extra 2 stages of the shuttle, 6.8 mils per kilo per minute VO2 max, which is pretty significant. 4.5 more reps in the box lift and carry, and a decrease in their 3.2 run time as well. Wood et al., this was the study that I spoke about, which is pretty much just following through long, slow distance and endurance-based training. But yes, they lost body fat. They also lost strength, grip strength. They decreased their vertical jump. They got less strength, less power because of the specificity of that exercise. Long, slow running, endurance-based training just didn't do anything except increase push-ups because of the push-ups, increase sit-ups because of the sit-ups. So what's the take home for conditioning for female soldiers from the literature? Obviously, periodization, it needs to be individualized, which hopefully is common knowledge to everyone in the room. The combination of both strength and endurance training, not just endurance training, task-specific training, HIIT training, and the combination of both upper and lower body exercises is the recommendation from the literature. We'll come back to what I alluded to before with New Zealand Defence. Now, the title of this study is What are the effects of gender-specific training? I would argue that it's what are the effects of individualized training? Because gender has nothing to do with it. It's based on treating what you see. If you see a deficit in strength, you need to improve that. You see a deficit in aerobic fitness, you need to improve that. Similar to what we saw in the US Marines before, the lighter males also had the same issue. Some of the guys in the US Marine Corps were 50 kilos. They were carrying the same relative load as a 50 kilo female. Therefore, they had the same increase in physiological cost for that activity. So, New Zealand Army, 28 females. They were separated into a strength training group or just normal practice, normal military conditioning. So long, slow running, push-ups, sit-ups. This was for their 10 weeks of basic training. They did this strength training program twice a week. It was basically a reverse pyramid where they did their first set of 6, then 5, then 4, then 3, then 2, based on their ability. The 3 key things that they looked at were strength and power. So a 1RM squat, a 1RM bench, a bag squat jump. Their required fitness level. So like many establishments, they still require push-ups, sit-ups, and a run for time. And then finally, their LCFT, their land combat fitness test. So they've got a jerry can lift in place. They've got a fire and movement activity. They've got a 2-handed jerry carry, basically up and down for shuttles. And then they have a 4-kilometer pack march as well. So this 10 weeks of strength training, 22.8% increase in 1RM squat, 13.2% increase in 1RM bench, 26% increase in vertical jump. The control group decreased their squat, just increased their bench, just increased their squat jump. Required fitness level. This is strength training, by the way, not endurance training, but almost a 24% increase in push-up performance, 11% increase in sit-up performance, and 40 seconds off their run time. Whereas the control group, despite the number of push-ups they did, only managed to increase by 1 repetition, no change in their sit-ups, and a slight increase in their run time. The strength group had a 93% pass rate for their RFLs, 69% pass rate in the control group. So despite doing the exact conditioning that's in the test, They had a lower pass rate than those who did the strength training. When it came to the LCFT, they speak for themselves. Increases across the board. No change in the jerry can lift in place. A slight increase in the firearm movement. A slight increase by 1 repetition in the jerry can maneuver, and a slight decrease in pack march time as well. So what? What does that mean for us? Most of the injury risk between males and females that's well documented in the literature is explained by fitness. It's nothing to do with sex whatsoever. So we build a fitter, stronger human, they're less likely to be injured. Females may present, whether it be for their PFAs, pre-enlistment, at a lower level of their capacity, of their actual ability, because they tend to be chronically undertrained. Females, therefore, and smaller males will be working at a higher level of their capacity for the same relative load or task. So conditioning prior to enlistment is essential. Really highlights the importance of the jobs for Unisport in conditioning these people prior to their careers in defence or police or fire, whatever it may be. With the key thing being upper limb strength and aerobic conditioning. There's a whole lot of references if you get bored.